Sometime nearing the end of 1991 or the beginning of 1992, it became painfully clear. Lane Staley needed an intervention. His mother and stepfather knew he had started to dabble in drugs from as early as 13 or 14 years old. They could sometimes smell alcohol on their son, but Lane had gone as far as to take Dexatrim, a dietary supplement which, if you took enough of it, hit like speed. The intervention was organized by Alice in Chains' longtime manager, Susan Silver. In fact, the intervention took place in her office, along with the rest of the band and Lane's stepfather, Jim Elmer. He didn't try to run out, said Elmer to reporter David de Sola. He was respectful to the process. Everybody went through their dialogue on their thoughts and concerns and what he meant to the people in the room there. Lane agreed to go to the Valley General Hospital in Monroe, Washington that very day. But it wasn't before long that inpatients realized that there was a celebrity in their midst. Kathleen Austin, the mother of Lane's girlfriend Demery, visited him one Sunday afternoon. Suddenly, they heard the live facelift video being played from the treatment center with a number of people watching. Lane was devastated, she said. He started to cry. Because from that point on, he wasn't a guy with an addiction problem going to treatment. He was Alice in Chains. Prior to the recording of Dirt, Alice in Chains decided to make a demo at the London Bridge Studios in Shoreline, Washington, but it went largely uneventful. A calm before the storm, perhaps. Once that was complete, the band and Dirt producer Dave Jordan began looking for the ideal studio. They had considered George Lucas's Skywalker sound, but ultimately decided on One-on-One Recording Studio, famous for Metallica's albums And Justice for All and the Black Album. The band moved to the mountains near Malibu and rehearsed for 5 days before entering the studio. Jordan heard the demo and was very impressed with how comprehensively developed the songs were. In fact, bassist Mike Starr's favorite version of Dirt was the demo. It is believed that production on the album began on April 27, 1992, 2 days before a grand jury would acquit 4 Los Angeles police officers for the savage beating of Rodney King. What ensued was 6 days of mayhem, leaving 63 people dead, 2,383 injured, over 12,000 arrested, and property damage over $1 billion, mostly to Koreatown. Guitarist Jerry Cantrell was on the road when the riots began. I was actually in a store buying some beer when some guys came in and started looting the place. I also got stuck in traffic and saw people pulling other people out of their cars and beating the crap out of them. That was some pretty scary shit to have to go through, and it definitely affected the overall feel of the album. Back in the studio, the band watched Los Angeles burn on a TV screen the size of a wall as they tracked their parts of the album, the images baking into their subconscious as they worked. Eventually, the city curfew and the heat of the chaos got to them, so the band decided to cool down in Joshua Tree with Slayer's Tom Araya before returning to the studio. However, once back in the studio, Mike Starr and producer Jordan started to have conflict of their own. Ultimately, Starr said he would not record anything until they got Evan Sheely to join them. Sheely is the guy who sold equipment to Starr and was a musician in his own right. It was he who helped Starr get his amp settings to perfection. Sheely was understandably nervous to want to fly to LA after the riots, but he agreed. However, Starr failed to pick him up at the airport, and when he got to the apartment, he saw what appeared to be an underage girl leaving. Sheely was furious. It seemed that Starr was unable to write anything for the record, which is why he was butting heads with Jordan, and why he flat out asked Sheely to help him come up with what to play. Sheely agreed, just as long as no hard drugs came out in front of him. Starr agreed. Reportedly, the first song they wrote for was Down in a Hole. Sheely was more technically proficient, while Starr was a thrasher who could only match Sheely to an extent. But the partnership worked out, and Mike finished his parts. Jordan was off Mike's back for the most part as the instrumentals were finally recorded, wrapping up the band's time at One-on-One Studios, welcoming another calm before yet another storm. Yes, believe it or not, Lane Staley was clean, and then he wasn't. Was it hanging with an old crowd? Was the treatment just not effective? What could be the culprit of his relapse? Would you believe me if I told you it was his sponsor? The band was working with Bob Timmons, an addiction specialist who apparently was working with 6 musicians in 3 prominent Seattle bands for heroin. Staley got word that Timmons was bragging that he got the Alice in Chains singer, which got Staley heated enough that he resumed his drug abuse. Now, this may have been an immature way of dealing with this issue, but producer Dave Jordan defended Staley and criticized Timmons. He was notorious for doing interventions on bands where he would just show up at a gig where the band's playing, where someone's got a problem in the band, and he charged $40,000 for one intervention. AA is supposed to be for free, and this guy was charging money for what Lane could have got for free. Timmons died in 2008. Evan Sheely, who worked with Mike Starr on his bass lines, found Staley shooting up while writing lyrics in the studio, and Jordan knew Staley was sneaking out to buy drugs downtown despite the riots and curfew. But as was mentioned earlier, the band would eventually escape LA and return after the riots. Regardless, Staley wasn't the only one abusing substances. Drummer Sean Kinney seemed to have been drinking all night and missed rehearsal. Jordan was pissed because he and the band had been waiting all day. At the last minute, Kinney arrived, ready to play when everybody was ready to go home. Kinney was not only ready to play, but he was ready to record, and he was insistent. Everyone acquiesced and let him do it. Song of choice? Rooster. Kinney crushed it. In fact, he was so good that that take is believed to be the drum recording of Rooster that made the album. So it seems that despite the benders, the band could still perform. After recording the basic guitar, drum, and bass tracks, Alice in Chains moved to Dave Jordan's El Dorado studio in Burbank for guitar and bass overdubs, as well as vocal recording. Recording of Lane Staley's vocals for Dirt began on June 17, and it is on this album that he developed his signature sound, stacked vocals. He heavily layered his vocals by recording 2 or 3 vocal tracks in multiple intervals. Jordan. What he would say to me when we did that stuff is he had it all worked out, and he would just say, "Give me another track. I want to double it. No, let's triple it." He was just telling me what he wanted to do, and we'd do it. He's the best I've ever worked with doing that, without a doubt. In reading about Staley, he struck me as a somewhat private person who knew what he needed in order to deliver a certain performance, even when he was a teenager. For Dirt, he asked the production staff to build a makeshift wall from soundproof material inside the studio so that he couldn't be seen while he was recording his vocals. Lane then created a shrine that included candles, a picture of the Last Supper, and a dead puppy in a jar. If the pain of drug addiction, racial violence, and societal collapse wasn't enough inspiration, dude had a dead puppy in a jar. Despite this, Staley didn't hit the ground running. Jordan had problems with Staley's drug use. When he started singing, he was singing off key. He was loaded. So I told him not to come into the studio loaded. I said, "You can get loaded wherever you want, but don't get loaded on my time." It was the first time I'd ever heard him sing bad. Staley denied it and stormed out of the studio, slamming every door on his way out. Again, this was not the most mature way of handling things, but Jordan had a job to do. He called Staley up and apologized, saying he just wanted to make a great record. Staley accepted the apology and returned to work. Brian Karlstrom, one of the engineers of the operation, stated, "I don't know what happened, but the next week after that, they started getting vocal takes. I don't know if Lane cut back on his using, or if he was just not going out partying at night, at least resting even though he was using. You can't just stop using if you're a heroin addict. But yeah, we started getting vocals, and the vocals are obviously pretty amazing to say the least." Okay, one more story. Are you aware of the song Fear the Voices? It's the lead single on Alice in Chains' Music Bank box set, but was recorded during the Dirt sessions. It was written by bassist Mike Starr, but the rest of the band didn't seem too keen on it. Nevertheless, the song exists because the band recorded it. Jordan, I spent more time on those 2 songs, one in particular, than any of the other songs on the record. They just were not good songs. I tried to make them work for Mike, but I just could not do it. And Jerry and Lane were getting fed up with the whole thing. It was like a kid bringing a dead mouse to school and showing it to everybody. Nevertheless, one Saturday afternoon, as Jordan and the band were trying to make the song work, Lane and Mike excused themselves to go to the bathroom. Yes, together. If engineer Karlstrom heard correctly, that was the day Mike tried heroin for the first time. He ended up throwing up on the carpet in the studio lounge. The nail in the coffin for Mike's song was when he came to the studio high and listened to Lane's performance on the song. Mike didn't like it and told Lane to do it over. Now, there are two versions of what Lane said in response. Version 1, "Fuck this song," and hung up the phone. Version 2, "Fuck you, I'm not singing this again," and hung up the phone. Again, maybe not the most mature response by Lane, but honestly, I don't blame him, not this time. I agree with the rest of the band. Fear the Voices at best could work on Facelift, Alice in Chains' debut album. But if this made it onto Dirt, it would literally be out of friendship, not merit. But a lot of people seem to really dig the song, which is a great reprieve for Mike. Dirt was released September 29, 1992, and as you might be aware, it is cited by many as Alice in Chains' Magnum Opus. The band kicks things off with Them Bones, a hauntingly brutal song about mortality, written by a man who lost his mother even before joining Alice in Chains, Jerry Cantrell, the band's creative engine. Here is author De Sola on Lane's contribution on the track. As he was hearing the music played back to him on the headphones, Lane began screaming the time to Jerry's guitar riff. He tracked the screams once or twice. He just made that up on the spot, Karlstrom said. Jerry is credited for the music and lyrics to the song, but it's difficult to imagine without those screams. Indeed, it is. Damn That River was inspired by an incident where Kinney hit Cantrell over the head with a coffee table, breaking it. I pushed and then you stumbled. I kicked you in the face. You stare at me so hollow. Got to keep that killing pace. And the river of blood from the fight couldn't be damned, but he didn't give a damn anyway. It's a great high octane track that will probably play in my head the next time I'm ready to drop kick a motherfucker. The band is unrelenting when they enter Rain When I Die. It's slower, more thoughtful initially, but Jesus Christ, does it not grind you into dust and just blow you into a hurricane never to be seen again? The lyrics are too mysterious as they point to Cantrell and Staley's relationships with their girlfriends. We hear the signature bass sound loud and clear in the intro. But do we attribute it to producer Dave Jordan or bass engineer Evan Sheely? Jordan. We made a program, I named it Mike Star. I don't know what the piece of equipment is, but whoever's got it, it probably has the program on it called Mike Star. That was the sound of Dirt, the lower end. And here's Sheely's take. I took a particular piece of equipment down there to one-on-one that I ran with the Ampeg SVT that gave the signature sound of Mike Star for that album. I programmed my own setting for that album, and that's what you hear on the album. Alice in Chains keeps their foot on your neck with Down in a Hole, the first song Sheely helped start to write. A stunning chorus that rips your heart out. The nostalgia is so strong it's hard to bear sometimes. The difference between the albums Dirt and Facelift is starting to become extremely obvious. Cantrell wrote this of his girlfriend, saying, "Down in a Hole is in my top 3 personally. It's to my longtime love. It's the reality of my life, the path I've chosen, and in a weird way, it kind of foretold where we are right now. It's hard for us to both understand that this life is not conducive to much success with long-term relationships." Sick Man was written by Staley while in rehab, and when out, he asked Cantrell to, quote, write him the sickest tune, the sickest, darkest, most fucked up and heaviest thing he could write. Those songs are coming from a real place, said producer Dave Jordan. They're not songs that are written for commercial consumption. They're songs that are written totally from somebody who's crawled through 2 miles of rusty razor blades. And it comes out in those songs, the anxiety, the torture, the physical and mental anguish. Cantrell wrote another tribute song, this time to his father, Jerry Cantrell Sr., who served in Vietnam. His childhood nickname was Rooster, so he gave the track the same name. Jordan said the first time he heard it, it sent chills up his spine. Same here. After These Bones, Rooster was the second song I heard from the album and forced me to consume the entire thing. Funny story, Lane walked into the studio with his drug dealer and Jordan played the mix he was working on for Rooster. Lane loved it, but the dealer said, "Well, I think you should..." "Shut up," Lane told him. Then Jordan yelled, "Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out of my studio." He then turned to Lane and said, "Don't bring your drug dealers around." Junkhead was the second track Lane wrote lyrics for in Rehab. And when it begins, you hear Sean say, "Junk, fuck," before counting in the rest of the band. Jordan loved it, and the band agreed to keep it. It's a meandering track with another soaring chorus talking about how great drugs can be, but perhaps not from a very convincing voice or from an encouraging tone. The album then slides into Dirt, which is more introspective as Lane laments on trying to hide myself from what is wrong with me, or in other words, hiding what is wrong with him from himself. But whatever is ailing him, it is the thing that is keeping him alive, and yet is burying him alive. Godsmack continues on the theme of addiction, stick your arm for some real fun, but also the clever quip at the end where Lane sings, "So your sickness weighs a ton, and God's name is smack for some," illustrating that we all have our crutches to get through life as our illnesses slowly decompose its host. Of Staley's vocal performance, engineer Brian Karlstrom said, "He sings on the verse on Godsmack with this effect that literally sounds like there's a tremolo or a Leslie on his voice. However, no one knows how he did it because, if you recall, he had that partition in the studio where no one could see him or his shrine." The untitled track, otherwise known as Iron Gland, features Slayer's Tamareo, sounding discordant and imperious before squeezing in Red Rum. Hate to Feel and Angry Chair are the two tracks solely credited to Staley. Yet again, I find myself supremely impressed by the chorus, or perhaps the hook before the chorus. It's the grooviest thing on this album. I am a complete sucker for it, it's so good. Plus the lyrics throughout the entire track are brilliant. It lets you into his world with enough info for you to get it, but with some niche aspects to make you super curious. Here is De Sola and Karlstrom on Angry Chair. Lane's vocals on Angry Chair are massive, unusually so compared to anything else on the album or in the Alice in Chains catalog. The reason for this? On the part where he's singing "Sitting on an Angry Chair," there's 16 tracks of vocals going there, Karlstrom said. All different harmonies and multiple layers of harmonies. Maybe there's a harmony part and it's tripled, and another harmony part and it's tripled, and the lead part. It was crazy. And then I had to find space to record all those delays because all the delays you hear on the vocals, I actually printed on tape along with the vocals. The delay Karlstrom refers to is an echo-like effect Lane used when recording his vocals. As was mentioned earlier, stacked vocals, man. That's the Lane Staley signature style. And finally, we have a track that has a decent shout for being the best grunge song ever written. Wood. Initially written for the soundtrack to the movie Singles, it thankfully made its way onto Dirt as well. But as incredible as this song sounds, the story behind its creation is a story unto itself. Andrew Wood, singer of the bands Malfunction and Mother Love Bone, was found comatose by his girlfriend due to a heroin overdose on March 16, 1990. He died on March 19 after being taken off of life support, 4 months before Mother Love Bone's debut album, Apple, was released. He was 24. What makes this even more heartbreaking was that Wood had been to rehab twice, with the second visit done with the goal, the specific goal, of being clean so that he could go on tour. Chris Cornell was a former roommate and friend. Cameron Crowe, who wrote the movie Singles, was inspired with how the Seattle music community banded together during a time when one of the godfathers of grunge had passed away, and wanted these guys to make original music for the movie, as it featured the grunge movement so much. On Wood's passing, Jerry Cantrell wrote Wood as a tribute and added, "I was thinking a lot about Andrew Wood at the time. We always had a great time when we did hang out, much like Chris Cornell and I do. There was never really a serious moment or conversation. It was all fun. Andy was a hilarious guy, full of life, and it was really sad to lose him. But I always hate people who judge the decisions others make. So it was also directed towards people who pass judgments." Now when you hear the lyrics in the chorus, "So I made a big mistake, tried to see it once my way," doesn't it hit so much fucking harder? Dirt is a beautifully filthy record. From the love ballads to the discordant drugged up ditties, it is a record about a reckoning with death. Here are producer Dave Jordan's words from David de Sola's brilliant biography. Jordan said that in comparison to Facelift, Dirt was, quote, "a totally different record, and it's all songs that were written from emotional and personal experiences. That's the reason that record resonates with so many people. A lot of people love that record because it's real. They're not pop songs written for pop consumption. They're songs that are written almost like a personal diary." And finally, engineer Brian Karlstrom confessed to De Sola that he feared that he may have been working on a pro-heroin album, an album that would encourage people to take drugs. But no, Dirt saved many people from the needle. As I started to encounter kids who grew up with that album, and even today, I've never bumped into one kid that said they'd use drugs because of the album. In fact, it's been the contrary every single time. Not just like half and half, but every single kid is like, "Wow, I didn't do drugs because of that album." Just listening to Lane's lyrics was like this big sign that said, "Don't come this way." That was a big shocker for me. I'm sure that people out there did drugs because of that album. It's hard for me to imagine that that didn't take place. But I haven't met any of them. Thanks for watching.